And earlier I spoke with Mike Rogers, a CNN national security commentator and former House Intelligence Chairman, and I asked him about the difficulties in tracking someone who isn't on the radar of intelligence officials.
Well, it's pretty difficult, Mike. There's a whole bunch of factors you have to try to do. You have to try to intercede in the radicalization effort somewhere early on. And in order to do that, you have to know that someone is going through that process. Really very difficult. My guess is that something happened either in one of those overseas trips to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, that changed him, that when he came home, he was a little different than the last time he had gone. And that's when family and community is so important to help law enforcement understand that they're approaching that radicalization phase so there can be some intervention early on. Other than that, very difficult thing to do. He came back. He was interviewed by immigration officials. All of those times, they detected nothing out of the norm. So, again, clearly, something kind of interrupted his life that put him on that path to radicalization that was missed by law enforcement, but probably not missed by family and community, at least to some lesser degree.
Right, so to see something, say something. But, you know, it's interesting with the screening on his return. I mean, he didn't just go, you know, to Kabul to hang out with family. He was in places like Kandahar, where the Taliban certainly has a presence, and even more so in a place like Quetta in Pakistan, which is a kind of Taliban HQ, if you'd like, in Pakistan. When he goes through the secondary screening, which he did, do you think that the system is up to it if he's been to these places more than once?
Well, those certainly would be red flags. Both Kandahar, obviously, it has some fairly extremist elements of the Taliban. Believe that in those areas there were joint chaining operations years ago with Al-Qaeda and Taliban, all of those things. Same with Quetta. It has been the heart and soul of both Taliban. You know, the Quetta Shura is there for the Taliban, so it has really significant importance, certainly in those parts of the world. And so that would have been a red flag to those investigators. That's why he probably got pulled into secondary saying, you know, what were you doing there? Who were you visiting there? What kind of things were you doing there? So nothing triggered. They're going to have to go back and look at that line of questioning to make sure that they did ask a thorough question, that they did push him a little bit to decide, you know, was this okay? Is there a legitimate reason for him there? And here's the scary part of this. He may actually gone with a legitimate reason. Maybe he had family or friends who may be in Quetta, but that's where he got exposed to some radical thinking. It could have been Quetta, it could have been Kandahar, or anywhere in between. That part you just wouldn't know, and you certainly wouldn't know by that preliminary investigation. So that's the challenging part of it. That's why you need a little extra help on the intelligence side to kind of put that equation together.
You know, you're a former House Intelligence Chairman, so you know how it works on the inside. We heard Donald Trump on the campaign trail calling for profiling, which is a bit of a dirty word in the US, but saying, you know, it works in Israel, why not here? Is that something that would ever get traction, do you think, among congressmen?
Well, I think there's a big difference. I used to be an FBI agent as well, and racial profiling does not work, and it shouldn't be used by law enforcement, nor should it be tolerated. But a criminal profile, meaning there are elements that would suggest you may fall into at least the category of suspected suspicious activity, either criminal or terrorist, is something very, very different. And race can be a part of that. It cannot be the only factor of that. So when you talk about that kind of profiling, if you look at what the Israelis do, they have this factor of several items, and you have to have a factor of several of those in order to get that pull aside or profile, as they talk about. In the FBI, it would be a criminal profile of an individual where there must be multiple points of intersection. So race can be one, but it can't be the only one. There has to be other intersections. So this is we'll probably have a lot of discussion in the United States about this. I argue that criminal profiles, well done, that aren't based solely on race, can be an important factor in helping you get to the right bad person before something bad happens.
You know, the level of sophistication in this case, I suppose, is also a factor. These were homemade devices. If you've got, you know, some skill, you could do it in your kitchen, literally. Some of them didn't go off. He was found sleeping in a doorway, which doesn't suggest a good getaway plan. But, you know, that actually points to the difficulty, doesn't it, for law enforcement and intelligence when something is so low-key, not professionally done, if you like. It speaks to that whole issue of intelligence services have to be right all the time, and a bad guy just has to be right once and lucky.
Yeah, and think of it's so true. And think of all the inputs that are coming at a guy like that, both social media and others. Inspire magazine is a magazine that talked about how you make these kinds of explosive devices. I think the title of the article was Bombs in Mom's Kitchen, and it talked to and tried to get people to inspire themselves to go out and make these devices and give it a whirl. And think about how lucky this event was. The Marine Corps run, that bomb went off at a time that was scheduled to have runners going by it. So that was a time device. Clearly there was some thought put into this. There was a registration hiccup that slowed the race down, meaning that the runners weren't where they were supposed to be at the scheduled time. That's the only thing that saved those runners. And the bomb did go off in New York. That would have had devastating effects had it been placed a little differently. So some of those small mistakes actually saved lives, still a lot of wounded. And you start thinking of that, it doesn't take somebody that's got years and years of training. It takes somebody who's committed to committing an act of violence. That's a hard standard for law enforcement to catch on every occasion.
Mike Rogers there.